Okay, so for the data sources, we can classify into two, primary and secondary. So primary uses the method of objective and subjective. When the data collector is the one using the data for analysis. So primary data, most research involves collection of data. There are several methods for direct uh, primary data collection, including the surveys, questionnaires, direct observations, and focus groups. Okay, so when it comes to the primary data collection, it is considered as the most authoritative and authentic data collection method. Okay, while the secondary data, it's the data obtained through the use of existing records or data collected by other entities for certain purposes. So it is said to be another person's original bank of knowledge. So when it comes to the secondary data, it's uh, coming from the other people, but it's more efficient actually and less expensive since you are not the one who is doing the collection of the data. Okay, it's cheaper and also it saves time, but of course it's very important also when it comes to research that we have our basic knowledge or other perspective when it comes to our research. Okay, so that's why we have the second chapter, the review of related literature and studies. Okay, so now, what are the advantages again for the primary? You know how the data was collected. You can get exactly the data that you need. So when it comes to your study, since it's you are the one who is conducting, it's very exact. Okay, the data that you needed is exact. And also, you know the accuracy of the data. Okay, the disadvantage, of course, it will take a long time to collect a data. It can be expensive. Okay, and then secondary, it's quick and cheap way to get a large amount of data. Well, disadvantages, you may not know how the data was collected. You may not get the exact data that you need. And the data might be out of date. Okay, it might be out of date. You may not know how accurate the data is. Unlike when you are the one who is collecting it. Okay, of course, you know how accurate is that data. And then, what about the methods of collecting data? So, first one, we have here the interview method. It could be direct or indirect. Okay, so if it is direct, the researcher personally interviews the respondents. Okay, so it's a in-person interviewing. Okay, it can be somehow expensive too, also. But when it comes to direct method, you should remember that you prepare the list of questions that you will ask. Okay, uh, and also you should know what to ask or how to follow up. Okay, when you are doing the interview. Okay, when it comes to indirect, the researcher use telephone, webcam, or cell phone to interview. So it's usually during our time, since we are experiencing this pandemic, we can conduct mostly we are conducting our interviews indirectly. Okay, so we are using Google Meet, Zoom, the MS Teams, and such. Okay, and then another one, the questionnaire method. It's a list of well-planned questions written on paper, which can be either personally administered or mailed by the researcher to the respondents using any of the following forms. Okay, so actually, if we compare the interview and the questionnaire method, when it comes to the interview, we can have our responses that is not limited. Okay, and we can have the open-ended questions. While questionnaire method might limit okay the responses of your respondents. Okay, we have your 6 types: guided response type, recall type, dichotomous type, multiple choice, multiple response, and rating scale type. So what about the guided response? Okay, so the respondent is guided in making his or her reply. For instance, have you been convicted of any crime? Yes or no? And there's an instruction, put a check in the space provided. If your answer is yes, proceed to the next question. If your answer is no, answer question number 3. Okay, so it's basically that you are guided when you are answering the questionnaire. And then we have here the recall type, the respondent's basic information: age, sex, birthday, civil status, nationality, religion, address, and such. Okay, and then the dichotomous type, answerable by 2 choices. Mostly, we are using yes or no. Okay, have you ever purchased a product or service from Shopee? Okay, is it a yes or no? Okay. And then multiple choice and multiple response type. So they allow your respondents to select one or more options from a list of answers that you define. Okay, so multiple choice, you chose one, pero if it's a multiple response, you might choose more than one, of course. So number 1, how many countries have you visited? It's a multiple choice. Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Or more than? Okay, is it 4 or more? And then number 2, multiple response. What appliances, devices do you have at home? And circle the numbers. Okay, so you can encircle all of them here: television, refrigerator, personal computer, telephone, and electric stove. Rating scale type, the respondent selects the number that most accurately represents their response. So how serious is the drug problem in your barangay? Check among the options: very serious, serious, fairly serious, not a problem. Okay, another response here that we can use: strongly agree, strongly disagree, agree, disagree. Okay, always, sometimes, often, never. And then what about empirical? Okay, empirical observation method. Observation is commonly used in psychological and anthropological studies, obtained through seeing, hearing, testing, touching, and smelling. So when it comes to empirical, we can have here aptitude test, IQ test, achievement test, and such. Okay, and then for the test method, this is widely used. Correction. The uh, aptitude test, the IQ test, and achievement test, it's under the test method. Okay, this is widely used in the psychological research and psychiatry. Okay, standard tests. Okay, they are the standard tests. Okay, and then for the registration method, the data gathered using this method are those that are obtained from the Philippine Statistics Authority, Land Transportation Office, Department of Education, SHED, and other government agencies. Okay, then last one, mechanical devices. So the devices that can be used when gathering data for social and educational researches are the camera, projector, videotape recorder, etc. Okay, in chemical, biological, and medical researches, the common devices are the X-ray machine, microscope, ultrasound, weighing scales, CT scan, etc. Or technically, if you are using device, of course, you are under this, mechanical devices. Okay, so those are the methods of collecting the data. And then, now, what about the sampling technique? Okay, the sampling, it's a process of obtaining samples. Okay, so making generalizations about the population based on that sample. Okay, it's the sample is the representative of the population. Okay, and then it do not need we we do- uh we do not need to research the entire population when uh, when we are collecting, okay, when we are collecting our data. So that's why we are using the sample. Okay, so we can classify this into two: probability or random sampling, and non-probability or the non-random sampling. Okay, so let's start first with the probability or random sampling. Okay, so researcher sets a selection of a few criteria when it comes to this and chooses a member of a population randomly. Okay, it's a method which every element of population has an equal chance of being included in a sample. Okay, so when we are using the probability sampling, we are reducing the sample bias. Okay, and also we can have the diverse population, and we can create an accurate sample. Okay, so usually when we have our random or probability sampling, we have our frame. Okay, when it comes to this. So one type here is the simple random sampling or the lottery method. Okay, names of respondents are written on small pieces of paper and rolled them, placed in a jar and picked at a random. Okay, so as you can see here, when it comes to the random or probability sampling, we can identify the sampling frame. We can identify the complete list or enumeration of all of the population members, okay, or elements. Okay, usually, since we are using the technology, uh, they are using the Excel, okay, to create a command that generates a sample. Okay, it's a computer generated list. Okay, aside from doing it like lottery, that you're picking from a bowl and getting those names or numbers. And then another one, the systematic sampling. Select samples by following same rules set by the researcher, which involves selecting the nth member where the random start is determined. Okay, so for example, suppose you have to do a phone survey. Your phone book contains 20,000 residence listing. Okay, you must choose 400 names for the sample, number the population from 1 to 20,000, then use a simple random sample to pick a number that represents the first name in the sample. Then choose every 50th name thereafter until you have a total of 400 names. Okay, so we are picking every 50th name. Okay, and overall we can have 400 names. Okay, 400 respondents or as our sample. Okay, so again, we choose a number first. Okay, by random picking. So let's say we choose 5. Okay, so if we start with 5, yan, the fifth person is the first sample. And then again, we add 50. Then let's identify the 55th person, the 105th person, again add 50, 155th person, and so on. Okay, until you get the 400 names. Okay, until you get the 400 names. So always pick every 50th. Okay, every 50th on the list. The next one we have here the stratified random. This method is applied when the population is divided into different strata or classes and each class must be represented in the study. For instance, Mrs. Torres was requested by the school administrator to conduct a survey about the students' agreement or disagreement about the proposed reduced days of classes. She obtained the total number of students through the school registrar in order to determine the number of students per year level that she needed in a survey. So as you can see here, when it comes to stratified random sampling, you need to identify your strata or the classes, okay, that you have in your population. For instance, senior high school students. So we can divide it by 2. So let's say grade 11 and grade 12. And then usually when it comes to the sample size or identifying the number of samples, we are using different tool for that, such as the Sloven's formula or the Cochrane. Okay, so for this discussion, we're not going to solve. Okay, we're not going to solve the sample size. So let's say we have here 315. as our sample size. So as you can see here, we have 500 students for grade 11 and 600 students for grade 12. So to identify the number of students, all we need to do is to divide that number of students all over the population, which is 500 over 1. So that's 45%, approximately 45%. And 600 students over 1,100, that's approximately 55% of the students. So let's multiply that percent to the sample size. So that's 315 times 0.45. So there are 142 samples for grade 11 and then 173 samples for grade 12. So as you can see here, uh, each strata, they have their own representative. Okay, so that's stratified random sampling. And then last one, we have here the cluster. Yeah, when geographical area where the study is too big and the target population is too large, in this technique, the selection of the sample units is not by individual, but by the groups called cluster. All of the members of one or more groups are used. Okay, so for instance, if you randomly sample 4 departments from your college population, the 4 departments make up the cluster sample. Divide your college faculty by department, and the department are the clusters. Number each department, then choose 4 different numbers using simple random sampling. All members of the 4 departments with those numbers are the cluster sample. So as you can see here, of all the types of random or probability sampling, we are using the lottery or the random, simple random sampling at the end. Okay, so for instance, here we have the College of Education. Okay, we have here the College of Education. So there's a mathematics department, physical education, English, social science, science, and Filipino. So if we use random sampling here, we choose 4. Okay, in this case, let's say it's math, English, science, and Filipino. And the faculty of the 4 departments are now our cluster sample. Okay, so other type actually when we have the probability or random sampling is the multi-stage. Okay, wherein you are combining different types of random sampling. So next one, how about the non-random or non-probability sampling? So when it comes to non-random or non-probability sampling, it's not possible. Somehow it's not possible to generate a sampling frame. Okay, so always remember that the difference between the two when it comes to the sampling frame, meaning you can identify the list. Okay, the list of all the members of the population. Okay, so when it comes to the non-random, it is usually used if we are creating a hypothesis, or it is as exploratory research, or practically it's a budget and time constraints. Okay, we use this. Okay, so element of the population is drawn based on the judgment of the researcher. First one is the purposive. The respondents chosen based on their knowledge of the information required by the researcher. For instance, if you're studying in a history of a certain town, of course, your target population there is the senior citizens. Okay, so since they live there since birth, okay, senior citizens who live since birth there. Okay, they are the most reliable persons to know the history of the town. Okay, so another example, those who experience the martial law, if you're studying about the martial law, okay, so those people who experience that, so that you can know firsthand their experience. Okay, so when it comes to purposive, again, they are knowledgeable enough, okay, to your study. And then for the convenience, this technique is resorted to by the researcher who need the information the fastest way possible. Okay, so the word convenience. A computer software store conducts a marketing study by interviewing potential customers who happen to be in the store browsing through the available software. Okay, so as you can see here, Usually, convenience is very useful when it comes to collecting preliminary or pilot data. Okay, it's an ease of access to the subjects, such as the customers, people at the mall, or passerbys in street. And the next one, quota. It's a form when the main consideration is to complete the designated proportional part of the population. Okay, so here, quota, we determine a specific number of individuals, okay, to select in our sample. Okay, and for instance, you are to investigate the relationship of students' performance in math and their attitude towards the subject. Okay, however, you are only given limited time. Okay, limited time to do the study. You may only consider 25 out of 500 students in your school. Okay, so it's limited. Okay, so you are setting, you are just setting the number of sample. Okay, so that's quota. And then for the snowball, researchers apply when the subjects are difficult to trace. Also, this sampling method in situations where the topic is highly sensitive and not openly discussed. Okay, we will take the help from the first element or the first respondent, which we select from the population, and ask him to recommend other elements who will fit the description of the sample needed. Okay, so for instance, survey the shelterless people or those illegal immigrants. Mga TNT, tago ng tago. Of course, if you're surveying them, you cannot have the data, okay, coming from an agency, coming from the government. So, of course, uh, it's coming from the people who know those people. Okay, and another example here that is sensitive, the COVID patients. Okay, if they don't want to declare it for your study or for to the people rather, and then the HIV uh, patients. Right, it's quite sensitive, and another one is the rape victims. It's the rape victim. So as you can see here, when it comes to snowball, it's coming from the recommendations of people. Okay, it's not necessarily given. There's a data that is presented already. Okay, so that is small snowball sampling. Okay, so last one, census or complete enumeration. It's a method of data collection from entire population. So of course, it's usually from the government, okay, the PSA, and the Philippine Statistics Authority. To know the number of persons in different places in our country, the government conducts census by taking into the consideration the entire population. Okay, so that's census or complete enumeration. Now, so let's try to identify the sampling technique used here. A study on attitudes about smoking is conducted at a college. The students are divided by class, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Then a random sample is selected from each class and interviewed. So as you can see here, there's a class or strata. Okay, there's a representative from each class, so therefore this is stratified sampling. Okay, next one. The CPA Review Computer Center of the Philippines would like to conduct a seminar on computerized accounting package in provincial areas. From the 12 regions, the director chooses one region from which he takes 3 municipalities to conduct the seminar. Okay, for this one, we can say that this is cluster sampling. Okay, so you choose only. Okay, from 12 regions, you choose one region. And also, it could be the multi-stage sampling. Okay, from which he takes three municipalities to conduct the seminar. Identify the sampling technique used to represent the class in the university week activities. A teacher selects 15 students from a class of 45 by drawing their class numbers from a bowl. Obviously, this is lottery or simple random sampling. Next one. To avoid working late, the quality control manager inspects the last 10 items produced that day. Okay, this is convenience sampling. Okay, so that is the sampling technique. The random and non-random sampling. No, we have here the last one. A professor of psychology is conducting a research on commitment to job. He needs a sample of 30 respondents working and serving in some parishes from social workers and government officials. Okay, so for this one, we have purposive sampling. Okay, since we are talking about commitment to job, so we are dealing with parishes, social workers, and government officials.